Thank you for being here. Greetings again. We're glad you showed up today. Happy Birth Center Week, and welcome to this panel, Lessons from the South, Midwives and Birth Centers Leading in Times of Crisis. Tech support, if you wouldn't mind putting the name and link to that song in the chat. That was reparations, and we want to be lifting up always our voices in solidarity with movements for reparations. So we thought it fitting to start with that. Um, my name is Jamara Amani. Oh, I need screen share capabilities, please. My name is Jamara Amani, and I am a mother of four. I'm a licensed midwife in the state of Florida, based in Miami. And I am also the executive director of Southern Birth Justice Network, a founder of the Birth Justice Movement, and co-founder of National Black Midwives Alliance. So I'm really excited and happy to be here to share it with this panel and this storytelling opportunity, an opportunity to elevate our birth justice
This
work.
meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, tech support. So I'm going to see if I can accomplish a screen share. So because we are in the South, because we are Black folks, because we are in respect of our ancestors, I thought we could start by doing a series of groundings. The first one is going to be calling in our ancestors. I'm having a little trouble with the screen share, so my slide just says calling in ancestors, and it has pictures of Black midwife ancestors on it. If I can get it up, I will. But in the meantime, I will call the names of some Black midwife ancestors, and I invite you to also and put names into the chat, or panelists, I invite you to come off mute and share names. So I'll start by calling the name of Mama Nasra Smith, Ashe, Nana Siti Opio, Nankuleku Tayemba, Ayana Ade, Claudia Booker, Afua Hassan, Biddy Mason, Oni Lee Logan, Gladys Milton, Margaret Smith, and Annie Mae Jackson. Ashe. Anyone from the panel would like to add a name? I see some names going in the chat. Oh, that's folks introducing themselves. If you would like to put an ancestor name, please add Ashe in the chat. Thank you all for being here. Hey, Crystal, adding Phyllis Goins. Thank you. I would any support from the chat too. Ruby Brown, Alberta Coleman, Thelma Jones, Ashe, Gracie Diola Freeman Beeman, Ashe, Nettie Bush, Ashe. Thank you. Thank you for those.
Seeing one more, Jamara. Catherine Wade said, my uncle George, an OBGYN and midwifery advocate.
Thank you. Hey, Catherine. Thank you for being here. Ashe. Okay. So we'll just take a moment to just ground ourselves and breathe into that presence of knowing that our ancestors are always with us and walk this path with us. So you can get into a comfortable position, take a moment to just ground yourself. Our next part of our grounding is going to be about breath, and it's going to be about connecting. So if you want to place a hand on your belly, the center of your breath, connect with that solar plexus, our emotional center. Take a deep breath in and just try to get centered. When I think about the second part of the grounding, I was really inspired by the title of this panel, which is about leading in times of crisis. In this moment that we're in, where many things feel uncertain, where things are in transition, I woke up many a morning in tears just as I, feel fear for people that I love and care about. And at this particular time, in this particular week, as we're moving into a seasonal shift, I think a lot about nature and how that keeps me grounded. I think a lot about connection and things that are constant, even when the world feels uncertain. And I think about the seasons, the seasonal transition, the equinox that is upon us, what the movement of the stars and the planets and the trees have to teach us and show us as we are seeking answers and seeking to be whole and to be well. So this next part of our grounding is called The Tree, and it is a poem by Kiera Tony, and it's called Tree Poem. Um, I will drop the link in the chat of the whole poem because my screen share is not working, but I'm going to read part 3 of the poem. So you can connect with your breath and we'll just ground in. Tree Poem Part 3. I think I'd rather be a tree, to stand in my bareness, effortlessly secure, remarkable in any light, enriched by the world in the way it ought to be for each living thing, embellished by my age and experiences, to give and receive without expectation, to be nurturing and nurtured without doubt, to have a place that is mine in the world, in a system which knows it needs me and I it, to be timeless, rigidly planted, yet open to entertain the push and pull of the wind, rightfully proud to be as big as I am meant to be, earnestly believing that when my time is done, I've done all I was born to do, expecting when that season comes, as it inevitably will, to elegantly fall back into the earth to await my next assignment. So in this season, and you can share in the chat or you can reflect on it amongst yourself. In this season, what are you harvesting? What is calling you in? What is grounding you? And what is making you whole? What are you harvesting? What is calling you in? What is grounding you? And what is making you whole? Just think about those reflection questions, especially as we enter this season. This weekend, we welcome a new season, and it's a time to get serious, to release, to connect with that which matters most. That's the season that we're moving into. Thank you for putting the questions in the chat. Okay. Is there anyone from the panel that would like to share? No, that's kind of a question that sprung on you. What are you harvesting? What's calling you in? What's grounding you? What's making you whole?
I'll say for me, I'm definitely calling in peace and rest, as those are things that I think I have lost sight of recently. So along with that, also health and just trying to prepare myself for the battle that is ahead, but making sure that I'm caring for myself in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah, that resonates completely. I would say harvesting time, trying to identify more time for exactly the kind of labor that Tina just described that is essential for what is to come, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Heather, did you want to share anything?
I was going to type in the chat, but right now what's been keeping me grounded is prayer and spending more time and being more thoughtful about my prayers.
Thank you. Okay, well, so those who are thinking on that question, keep reflecting on that and feel free to share at any point. But just keep those questions close to you, even if you're not prepared to answer them right now. Okay, so the third part of our grounding, as we move into our panel. Oh, I see Cortez. I am harvesting healing, deeper understanding of self, deeper knowledge of my purpose. Clint, Prince, and Princess family. I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Cortez. Okay, so the third part of our grounding is more specifically focused on birth justice. I am really excited to be having this discussion about lessons from the South because the South is the birthplace of birth justice. It's birth justice is a movement that ensures that everyone, especially marginalized people, Black, Indigenous, Brown folks, queer folks, immigrant folks, youth, disabled folks, are centered and have the right to respectful care, safe care, care that is centered around our rights as it relates to any part of our reproductive and sexual lives, but specifically pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Um, Birth justice is really grounded in reproductive justice and grows out of the reproductive justice movement. And it's a movement that was organized by birth workers from the South. The birth justice framework specifically was born here in a historically Black community called Overtown in Miami, where I was teaching childbirth classes with a colleague of mine named Anjali. We were student midwives, and we were asking this question, what does it mean to birth with justice? And we got different answers from the mothers in that class, and we created a framework based out of that. And we taught the first birth justice workshop in June of 2010 at the United States Social Forum in Detroit. And I was speaking about this earlier. The reason that we felt like it was so important to introduce Birth Justice 101 at a place that was not birth workers is because the idea of it was to build a bridge between birth justice and other movements, because we understood that it's intersectional, that we needed to inspire people and gather people from different movements because we're all born, right? We all know someone who's given birth and we're all impacted by these issues. So the idea was to kind of spark a larger movement around our rights as it relates to birth and birthing and parenting. Um, and, we know because of the history that there's this, long trajectory of medical racism, obstetric violence, the attempted destruction of midwifery, underfunding for our movements. And now we're seeing the rise of maternity care deserts, where we have hospitals closing in places where people need them the most, in rural areas and in urban areas where mortality rates tend to be high. So we're here to speak out about that, and we're here to envision a bold and different future. So I have a few more minutes for the grounding, and I would like to lead us in a visioning. There is a project that's going to be launching in October that's called the Birth Justice Origins Project. And some of what I just shared with you all, plus a lot more, is going to be celebrated and uplifted in a webinar on October 23rd. Mark your calendars. I don't have the time yet, but we'll make sure that folks who are attending here get an invitation. We want to make sure that birth justice, thank you for all the celebration, appreciate y'all. We want to make sure that birth justice is, that we know where birth justice comes from, that it remains rooted in the principles and values and intentions that it was created with, and that the path forward for birth justice is rooted in just like we spoke about the tree in our meditation, that the future of birth justice is the branches that are rooted in its origins, because we don't want it to be diluted. We want it to be authentic, and we want it to remain true to its values. So that being said, there's different parts of the Birth Justice Origins Project, and one of those is Birth Justice Futures. And so I'm going to read to you a little bit of the Birth Justice Futures. And again, I invite you to close your eyes if you want to, connect with your breath, get comfortable, and allow yourself to envision what is our birth justice future. We envision a world where our babies are well, our families are thriving, and we have full access to the tools and support needed to exercise our rights. We envision a world where we are able to be in the bodies that hold us whole as sacred waters, not parts. We are gathered in unity and respect of individuality. We speak truth to power in a symphony of support. We don't need mirrors to see our souls because we reflect that in each other through the values of inclusion and justice. We decolonize our hearts and our minds through community and connection. We envision a world where activism is our birthright. We believe that changing the landscape of bodies, reproduction, and birth, locally, nationally, and globally, is part of our legacy. There are many stories of birth justice. This particular one is foundational and seminal. We advance the birth justice framework to provide language that does not exist on a national platform at this time in the burgeoning movement advocating for access to midwives and doulas. We advocate for birthing rights as a justice issue. We demand medical racism and obstetric violence named as root causes of Black maternal and infant death. We are shifting stereotypical narratives of health disparities toward conversations about the function of power in healthcare settings. We are connecting the intersections of race and gender as a lens through which to understand birth. We are documenting the workforce dissemination of Black and Indigenous midwives and healers. We are centering LGBTQI+ people in the work of birth justice. We are articulating Black cultural specificity and excellence as forms of ancient technologies that saves lives. We embrace birth as a key part of our liberation story as oppressed people. We were not the first to say these things or to write about them. However, acknowledging the birth of birth justice means uplifting the first framework, workshops, curricula, and grassroots organizations that have been consistently building this movement since 2009, utilizing the language, values, and praxis of birth justice. We envision a world where through our connections to the planet, the land, and to nature, and with the smiles of the youth as motivation, we activate our internal power to develop solutions to local and global challenges. We integrate healing and cultural wisdom into our daily lives. We free ourselves to the soundtrack of our children's laughter. We envision a world where there is a midwife on every block and a birth center in every hood. We are the healers we need, and we build what we don't have with what our ancestors taught us. We remember care in the ways of the ancients, and we utilize the principle of Sankofa to bring forward that which we need now to actualize the fullness of our humanity. This care feels like the deep exhale after a warm group hug of loved ones. We envision a world where human milk flows like a river to all the babies who need it to grow. Support is everywhere, and the air feels safe. We are full of joy and dancing as we excavate the ancestral narratives that liberate us. Our rights and our stories and our dreams are reflected in the policies that govern our homes and our worlds. We remold the world with clay and love. We envision a world where there are no waiting rooms, no turning away, no inability to pay that keeps someone from the care they need. We embody life that creates consensually and exponentially unto itself. We live in a world where our lives are sacred and everything around us supports that reality. Ashe. Just breathe that in. Just breathe that in. And so the question for you all is, what is your vision of birth justice? What is your vision of birth justice? Feel free to drop it in the chat. Panelists, feel free to come off mute or put yours in the chat, whichever feels most comfortable. I'm going to pull up these bios and we're going to get into some conversation. And panelists, you can feel free to weave your vision of birth justice into your answers after we get into discussion too. All right.
Do you want us to go ahead and answer?
Yes, if you feel
I'll go.
inspired to, please.
So when I think about birth justice, I think about like the part where you mentioned a midwife on every block, or, you know, a birthing center in every hood. When I think about what it would look like for justice, to me, it means that you could walk into any hospital, any birth center with any provider and get exactly what you need. Like, it shouldn't have to be a hunt to find somebody who would provide you with the services that you need. So that's how I would envision it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Beautiful. Anyone else? Are y'all gonna weave it in? Okay. So I'll go to intros then and grab
There's
that.
one in the chat. I was just gonna,
Oh, please do. I can't see it right now, so I'm looking at bios.
bodies not being policed, actually listening to the concerns being raised, freedom to parent as I choose a justice doula for every birth.
Yes, I love it. Beautiful. All right, so let's jump in. Please keep dropping your visions in the chat and we will uplift them as we move through. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I introduced myself already. So next is Tamara Tate, pronouns she and her, a midwife and family therapist. She is the director of the Atlanta Birth Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Tamara earned a BA in psychology from Princeton University, minoring in African American and Women's Studies, after which she pursued her passion for community health and midwifery at Miami-Dade College, shout out 305. She holds a master's degree in marriage and family therapy and completed PhD coursework in family therapy before founding Magnolia Birth House, a pregnancy resource center and birth center in Miami, Florida. Tamara spent 6 years as the Director of Student Life, Equity, and Access at the Midwives College of Utah and currently serves as the board president of the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery. With over 2 decades in maternal and perinatal health and as an advocate for midwifery sustainability, she has worked to reduce health inequities and increase access to mental health services to at-risk families. And next we have Tina Brema, she, her, is a midwife, herbalist, and unapologetic advocate for BIPOC birthing people. She is the founder and executive director of Aya Birth and Community Wellness, North Carolina's only Black-owned midwife-led birth center. With over 25 years in women's health and a legacy of firsts behind her, Tina is a leading voice for reproductive justice and birth equity. She also founded Legacy Birth Academy, a workforce development program which seeks to decrease maternal health disparities by increasing diversity among out-of-hospital birth workers. Her herbal product line, Gracie Diola's Natural Wellness Remedies, is yet another way in which she is reclaiming wellness and autonomy for the community. Tina's work blends clinical expertise, ancestral traditions, and community wisdom to reimagine change systems that shape Black maternal and infant health in North Carolina and beyond. And Dr. Heather Skanes, she, her, is an OBGYN and the founder and executive director of Oasis Family Birthing Center in Birmingham, Alabama. Inspired by the birth justice movement, Heather works to improve outcomes for women of color in the low-income neighborhood in which her practice is located. She was introduced to the midwifery model of care during her residency at Morehouse School of Medicine and was shocked to realize its underutilization in her home state of Alabama. In 2021, she developed her own private practice, which partners with community midwives. She is actively involved in her community, providing educational workshops and to local organizations and preceptorships to midwifery students. Whew, this is a powerhouse panel. I love it. I do want to ask if tech support, if you can get that slide with the birth center map up, birth centers, BCE birth centers in the South, that would be amazing. I wasn't able to make my screen share work. Oh, you are fast. Yes. So before we jump into our conversation, I did want to make sure that we give a shout out to the BCE network members in the South. I think all of our centers are on there, right? So this is like an incredible thing because a few years ago, this map didn't look like this, right? The white dots are established birth centers providing full birth services, and the purple dots are developing birth centers. So this map is expanding, and the South is on the come up. The South got something to say, and the South got a lot to say about birth. So thank you for sharing that. And let's jump into the conversation. So here we are. I'm going to start in the order that I read the bio. So I'm going to start with Tamara Tate. What are the greatest challenges in the perinatal systems crisis you currently face in your community and state? And I know you have two states that you're running birth centers, so I'm not sure which one you want to answer.
I think the challenges are the same. So, right, that is the lesson available, that the challenges are the same. I think that right now, as birth centers, for those birth centers who accept Medicaid and who accept insurance as a form of payment, that the challenge is whether the ACA subsidies continue after December 31st, 2025, and whether there's any reduction to the scope of access for Medicaid for families who are above the poverty line. When you have 40% of clients who use Medicaid as a form of payment, and in total 90 to 95% of your client population uses some form of insurance, whether it's Medicaid or commercial insurance, then any reduction in access to that really impacts your bottom line. And so, I would say access to healthcare coverage is a big barrier for us, and an evolving challenge. And we won't really know where all of that is going to land for quite some time. In a worst case scenario framework where the Medicaid thresholds are lowered, or the ACA subsidies are not extended, then there's going to be a whole lot of folks out there who don't have health coverage, and whether they'll be able to afford to pay out of pocket for their care is a question that's up for grabs, and whether there is any philanthropy that can step in to close that gap is also up for grabs. And so I think the unknowingness of that in 2026 is definitely one of the more urgent challenges that I see among a sea of challenges in providing, maternal health care, perinatal health care, like writ large.
Yeah, those are some pretty big challenges, and you're right. Many of the challenges are the same across the South. There's some nuances in different states, but we definitely see the themes across the South. I'm going to go next to Tina. What are some of the challenges you're facing in your community?
Yeah, so as Tamara said, we're all dealing with issues with the underfunding of birth centers, pay parity, and those types of things. It's interesting. We're all in the South, and people will say, "Oh, you have the same issues," pretty much their blues ain't like mine, but we can identify with all of each other. In North Carolina, we have a lot of hospital closures. Like in the last 5 or 10 years, we've had over a dozen hospitals close their maternity systems. So it's very important that we bring in more birth centers. I will say that my birth center was one of 3 that have opened in the last year. So that's some progress, Other things that we have, like I said, is underfunding. We in North Carolina we're in a funding desert. I would call it a philanthropic desert. Like the people that do have funding and are trying to fund initiatives in this area, they are not trying to fund birth work. So we have to look at regional funding and national funding. That's an issue. We have some policy attacks, we have the abortion bans, we have the Medicaid cuts, broader oppression, like redistricting voting precincts and things like that, and some of the ICE violence that's come into our community. We still have issues with licensure and policy barriers here in North Carolina. CPMs are not allowed to practice. And so in my birth center, having a very difficult time hiring CNMs that either want to work in an out-of-hospital setting, that I can afford to pay in an out-of-hospital setting, or that know what they're doing in an out-of-hospital setting. So, once we remove some of those legislative barriers and allow full autonomy for CNMs for one, but also licensed CPMs, that's going to be an ongoing issue. And then definitely hospital partnerships. trying to get partnerships with the hospital to transfer to work with, to be in collaboration, so that we have seamless transfers and true continuity of care. Those are all issues that, are plaguing us right now.
So, Tina, what have you seen be successful? What those you named a couple of solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely opening more birth centers, advocating for pay parity is large. We have a bill that's on the table right now, possibly for licensing CPMs. I'm not so hopeful because they've introduced this bill probably the last 20 years, and it just has not gone through yet. We are in a state where the medical board has a lot of power, and they see us as a threat rather than allowing us to fill the gaps. They don't have enough OBGYNs, but they also don't want CNMs, or they don't want midwives delivering the babies, which is very interesting. So having an issue, hospital partnerships, like really approaching those hospitals and saying, hey, we're here, we're not going anywhere. You have to see our patients if I send them in. So it looks a whole lot better and works a whole lot seamless if you work with me on this so that you know that they're coming and you know what to expect when they get there. I mean, I think that you know, people think about birth centers as being a clinic. Oh, you're building a clinic in the area. But, really, we're trying to build ecosystems. We're trying to change the care model. And so as long as we don't get autonomy, trust, safety, those things that the community needs, Black and brown and all kinds of birthing people are not going to get what they need. There's not going to be what one of the people wrote in the chat, a place where everybody can walk in and get what they need.
Yeah, I love what you said about building ecosystems. That is so important. It's more than a clinic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Dr. Skanes, I'm going to go to you. What challenges are you seeing in your work as an OB? Is it any different or some of the similar challenges as the midwives?
I would say it's still very similar challenges, even though like I'm part of the medical association, I pay dues and all of that because we have to be a part of it. They are still very adamant that this is not something that they want to have in the state because it's seen as a threat to hospitals. But again, in our state, I think we've had 14 hospital closures over the past several years. I know at least 4 within the last year that have closed their labor and delivery units. So, our state is largely rural, 66%, have limited or no access to obstetrical services. So, we brought this to the attention of the state that this is something that could be a remedy, but still getting a whole lot of pushback. I think the other thing to consider in Southern states is that, post Dobbs, a lot of providers don't want to come here. So, as an OBGYN, if you're not from Alabama, there's really no reason that you would necessarily want to come and practice here because the care is that we can provide is so limited. And also Alabama has one of the highest pregnancy criminalization rates. So if you don't want to be a part of that, then you're not going to come to Alabama, in addition to a lot of times people just don't want to come to Alabama. So I think that a lot of times, these medical boards are very short-sighted and they're not looking at long term, which is that we already don't have enough providers. You all are going to retire probably within the next 5 to 10 years. There's a whole group of you all that is going to retire, and you don't have enough young physicians coming in to take that place. You do have a growing midwifery population, so why not support that system and utilize those workers? So yes, very similar challenges as far as that goes. And then it's also as far as insurance goes, a lot of these things are very interconnected, like the medical board, the Department of Public Health, the insurance companies, like here, they're all interconnected. And so if you get pushback from one, you're also going to get pushback from the other, which is trying to get our in-network status with insurances. I'll say one positive thing that has happened within the last several months is that Alabama was granted the TMAH grant for Medicaid to collaborate with birthing centers. And so I know that's going to be a very long process, but that makes me hopeful that it's something, that could potentially open up access for those Medicaid patients.
Yeah, it's similar. I mean, when I'm in Florida and I'm hearing that OBs are leaving or not wanting to come to your state, and we're seeing a similar thing in Florida with the 6-week ban, as I'm sure many states across the South are seeing as well. And people even say, like, why do you live there? Why do you want to go there? but I'm always like, as the waters rise and, people have less and less resources, somebody's got to be here, you know, um, somebody's got to be here to help the folks that get left behind. So, how are you working with midwives, Dr. Skanes?
So the midwives, they are running the birth center, but we also work with community midwives to provide, additional services, for things that they can't provide. So there's very strict rules about what CPMs can do and what they can't do. And so sometimes we're able to provide those services for community midwives, as well as we take on, the biggest part of the birthing center was to also train midwives of color. They were having a very hard time finding preceptors. Even though there were midwives here who were not of color, who could have been preceptors, they were getting turned down, a lot of the Black students. And so we have taken those students in and provided them with opportunities to train, because we want to have more licensed midwives, but we also want specifically more midwives of color.
I love that. That collaboration, I think, is the key, and restoring that collaboration between different types of midwives, between midwives and doctors, because it's really going to take all of us. I wanted to ask tech support if we could uplift some of the comments from the chat. I know there were some people still answering the visioning question around birth justice. So I want to make sure that we're being interactive with folks in the chat. And then Midwife Tamara and Midwife Tina, I'll come to you for your birth justice visions after.
Great, let me just pull these back up. So we had breastfeeding education was in the visioning, support breastfeeding, stable funding for training of more midwives to offload the burden of the few practicing, thriving wages for all midwives in every state, families guiding the care they envision. Birth justice to me means dismantling of uneven hierarchy between medical systems and birthing people, the respect and knowledge of midwives being uplifted, honored, and funded.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for uplifting those. Okay, Midwife Tina, you want to share your birth justice vision with us?
Yeah, I think for me, my birth justice vision is like someone has said previously, being able to give people the care that they need where they want it. I'm an out of hospital midwife to the core, and so having people have accessibility and options for home birth, birth center birth, wherever they want to be, out on the farm births, whatever, and having that affordable. And so for me, I've been thinking a lot of, you talked about solutions. I've been thinking about ways in which if we don't have Medicaid at the end of the year, then what are we going to do? How do we still support our community? What do you bring to the table? What types of things are you able to offer in your community, right? Because who knows? I don't know where public schools are going right now. So we're going to need everybody's skill set. We need the doctors, we need the lawyers, yada, yada, yada. We need the medical providers. We need people who can teach. We need people who can farm. How are we going to eat? So I'm really trying to get outside of some of these systems and just figure out how can we be self-sustaining as a community, and so I'm not so much into what's happening in the government. What are they taking from us? What are they trying to keep from us? I'm like, what do I have to give back to those who don't have, And so just trying to find ways where everybody can get care, like through our open access clinic, but also we do need funding. We need those people who sitting on these millions of dollars to give some of it up, And so as a community advocate, I'm looking at the bigger picture and not just the birth justice picture. Like how are we gonna live and how are we gonna take care of each other? And I think that the South has been hard hit by racism and by this maternal health issue, which is not even a crisis. I think things are working exactly the way people wanted them to. But we also are a place for solutions. The people in the South have gone through a lot. And so I don't think that this is going to be any different. This is our time to rise.
I love that. And I love that we open with the reparations song because that's what you're talking about. Is, at the heart of reparations is repairing. How do we repair what we've lost? How do we reclaim what we've lost? How do we be self-sustaining? I love that question. As a community, not just relying on what the government is doing, although we should demand our rights from governments because we pay taxes and because our ancestors are owed. But we know we have to survive no matter what they're doing. So, Midwife Tamara, what is your vision for birth justice?
I think someone earlier said that it's an ecosystem. And so we know the historical context of how midwives serve their communities, like sort of the midwife being like a one-stop shop for all manner of support for the community. And I think that a lot of how birth centers have operated in the recent past in the United States, so like let's say the last 50 years, has been like what we do is like we're a place where you can have a baby. And I think that not for practical reasons, but also for like more political reasons, like birth centers actually have to be much more than that in what's coming. We can't just be the place that you have your baby. We need to be the place where you pick up your CSA vegetables. We need to be the place where you come to see your mental health therapist. We need to be the place where you get your GYN services or your affirming healthcare. Like the birth center has to be like a medical hub, but I think even more than that, it also has to be not just the ecosystem of care provision, but also the ecosystem of like values around reproductive health rights and justice, right? So we need to be like the physical embodiment of that in our communities, and then the practical embodiment of what it is that those communities need, right? So if it is like a daycare or an after school program or a community garden or like a job training night that happens, like, and so that the birth centers that are built for the future need to have space to hold all of that, because as as Tina said, it's going to get really basic about like what it is that we need. And so the birth center really being a beacon for housing all of that, for holding that for the community. And yeah, we need resources to do that. Like the money has to exist in order for us to do that. But rather than it being like we're hustling to do different things just to keep the doors open, like it's not a hustle. It's like a requirement for delivering what it is that the community needs. Um, and really thinking critically about that in this moment. So like, what is the community asking for from us? And how can we get that for them so that they know that when they show up at our doors, it's here for them, whatever that is, like whatever is the need in your local area, whether it's being a place where midwives can be trained or being a place where someone can get their groceries or where you learn how to make soap or where you do the personal defense class, like all of that stuff, the community medic training, like this is the birth center being a catch-all for all of that. And so then people can pour into that because it gives back to them, even if you can't get like the $1 million from whoever is giving the $1 million, but the community feeds you. And so for me, that means also being located in community, right? Like I don't need to be in a building that's like separates myself or is disconnected from my surroundings. I really need to figure out how to be embedded in my community so that that reciprocal relationship is there. Um, and so, that's what birth justice looks like for me in 2025, like the birth center being the place that delivers what the community needs.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'd love for you to talk about one solution that we're working on together for Miami, the partnership, if you'd like to say anything about it, because that is the vision.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the Magnolia and Southern Birth Justice Network have partnered on this like community collaborative real estate opportunity that came from a local Miami foundation. And what that really delivers is like a physical home, right? A place that you can then vision into whatever the needs are, right? So give us the building, and then we will give the community the things that they need. And so maybe
Right.
we know some of what those things are already, but we then have the ability to learn more about that because we're in the community, right? And we're asking that question, and we have the freedom to ask that question in a more long range way because the space is ours, right? It's not, you're not victim, you're not swaying with the winds of the landlord or the whoever, right? It's your space. You have self-determination in your space, and then you can call a different question to your community than you were previously calling because you're more deeply embedded in that space. And that is a trend that I've seen as someone who's been running birth centers for like almost a decade. There is this shift that's been happening from like the second generation birth centers that were opened 8 to 15 years ago, of these new birth centers, these new post-pandemic birth centers, where land ownership is part of the solution making. And so I think we need to put that hand in hand, as is envisioned in this future space, with like not just the birth care or the prenatal care, but also the community care. And what community care looks like in every community is going to be different. You know, in Miami, it might look like a community medic training. It might look like soap making. It might look like self-defense classes. It might look like doula training, you know, those kinds of things. But like every community is going to have another solution. And I think if, you know, if we're always ready, we don't have to get ready. That's not, I'm Bajan. That's not like a Caribbean saying. I think that's an American saying. But like, what are we supposed to be getting ready for right now? All the things, right? So our birth centers as places where we invest with the community and that readiness, so that if these systems that we've come to depend on disappear, it doesn't really impact what we're doing. Like we're still doing what we're doing because that's what the community has asked for from us.
Yeah, and the vision really is birth centers as centers of wellness. Like you said, not just a place where you come to have your baby or only where you come when you're pregnant, but this is the center of wellness in this community. And that the community comes to know it that way, and that the community feels welcome in that space to help build that space out too, because our communities are rich in knowledge and wisdom and generational wealth, and and I don't mean dollars, I mean just in that family wisdom that many people carry with them. There's lots of dads in my community who can come and do a nutrition workshop, or to teach exercise classes. There's lots of mamas who are entrepreneurs and can teach other people their skills. And so part of the vision is to have this community hub for birth justice so that it can exponentially grow in the hands of the community. And we're going, like you said, we're going to need that. We're going to need that for survival, in practical ways and in futuristic ways. So, okay, I'm going to bring this question about solutions and what are we building. I'm really actually interested in knowing, what are the lessons that you've learned? All of us on this call have been in this work for a while now. And what is something you're doing differently than you did when you started? Or how are you thinking differently about what comes next? I'll leave it open, whoever wants to answer that. What are you doing differently, or how are you thinking differently about the future?
I will say that for me, building on what Tamara said about, it being a hub for wellness, I think in the beginning, my focus was so much on how do we a birth center and provide birth for people, and not really, and it's because I came out of home birth community, but now I'm really realizing that sustainability for the center has to do more with the primary care, the well person care, taking care of the babies, and that comes with some issues in North Carolina, because while as a CNM, I can practice without a physician at this point, I can't even hire like a family nurse practitioner because they will still need a physician to sign for them. I can't bring in a women's health nurse practitioner because they will still need a physician to sign for them. And that's where all of this collaboration really comes into play. I think that right now I'm getting old. And so what can I do where I don't have to be on call all the time? And some of that is providing other services that are within, within my scope. And the other thing that I've learned that is so important to have a team, because a lot of us are in communities where we're going at it by ourselves. We're like, what can I do? How can I do? And we're burning ourselves out. You asked in the beginning what we were calling in. I'm calling in health. I'm calling in peace. I'm calling in rest. And it's important. But also, I'm calling in people to come help with this stuff. Y'all come because I can't do it all. And so I think that my view as to what I'm bringing to the community, what my birth center means to the community, and what my capacity is, has really changed since I started on this venture.
Thank you. I'm big on the team building. That I really believe in that. I've seen too many people burn out as I've been in this work, and I know the reason that I'm still here is because I have a team. So shout out to Southern Birth Justice Network team. I see y'all. Dr. Heather, what are you doing and thinking differently these days?
Well, I'm thinking a lot more about the team that we're having. I think midwifery is a lot different than like obstetrics and the expectation of the community or the expectation of the client. And so kind of one of the things that I've learned over the last year or two is that if they don't feel like they can trust the midwife, or if they feel like the midwife is not comfortable in this setting, they're not going to stay. It's not like when you go to the OBGYN office, a lot of times, I don't know. I mean, I do feel like my patients trust me, but just other places I've worked, I feel like that wasn't important to the patient. They're just like, this is the closest facility, I'm going to get who I get, whatever. But when it comes to midwifery, like, I feel like that trust, they need to trust you, but they also need to feel like you're comfortable and that you care about that community. And when that's missing, they're just not, the clients aren't going to participate. So that's one thing I'm looking at is like the staff. I don't know, there's not a good metric for that. But it is something that you have to continually pay attention to, when looking at team building. Like, is the community going to feel comfortable with this person?
Yeah. Well, I want to uplift the Black Midwives model of care, which kind of outlines how we build that trust. But also, what are some of the practices that you do to build trust with your clients?
I think that, so this is the tricky part specifically about Alabama, is that when we started this birthing center, we didn't have any Black midwives to start. So there wasn't anybody for me to pull into it. All I could do is train, right? Like, we want to have Black midwives. So we were training a lot, students and stuff like that. And now kind of circling back to our students, like, hey, the community actually, likes you. You might be a young midwife, but they do trust you even more so than the experienced midwives who are not Black. So kind of reaching back into the whole purpose of, our training to kind of continue to have that trust within the community, because we have so many events within the community. And I think when people continually see you at those things, even when it has nothing to do with birth, just community engagement, I think that also makes a difference.
Yeah, for sure. Being like literally showing up makes a big difference. Yeah. Tamara Tate, you want to add anything, Midwife Tamara, about you said you've been running birth centers for 10 years. Is there anything that you do today or are planning to do that you would not have thought of or done 10 years ago?
I think the certainty around the multiple care streams and thus revenue streams is much clearer now than it would have been back then. No one, even at a national level, was inviting birth centers to be a care hub beyond the provision of healthcare for pregnancy and birth. And so recognizing that whether it's a birth center with like a $700,000 budget or a birth center with a $3 million budget, as long as you're taking insurance, the problems are the same of like, how are you financially sustainable? And the fact that birth takes anywhere from 4 to 9 months to actually pay you dollars means that financial sustainability comes in the form of single service visits. But also that if 30% of maternal mortality is postpartum, then releasing our clients that we've built trust with for 4 to 9 months into a regular healthcare system that is perhaps not concerned about their humanity, perhaps not interested in them, is actually an ethical problem. Like we teach clients, pregnancy as a point of care has so many more touch points. The only time someone interacts with their care provider this much is like if they have like a disease or like a chronic condition. And so we get so much trust building that happens over the course of prenatal care and postpartum that we then squander that when we send those individuals back out into the community and expect them to even tap into regular healthcare because we've taught them that they deserve something otherwise. And so really looking at the postpartum period and that early first year with the newborn as like, what can we do with a mother baby, parent baby dyad that allows us to hold families in that first postpartum year and deliver more on that promise for like healthcare that addresses their personhood throughout like, you know, as they are parenting young families, as they are adjusting to postpartum, as their family dynamics have shifted. And so that's not just a proposition that makes us more sustainable financially, but it's like a necessary realization of the promises we've already made to them, that we keep those promises by holding their family close throughout that, you know, first 2 years. Maybe they can find a pediatrician after that time, but for them to stay with us for well baby care, for sick baby care, and we also know that parents are going to take the baby to the pediatrician, but they're not going to take themselves to the doctor. And so if you're coming in for your pediatric visit, I can pair your visit with your baby's visit because you're already in the building. And so really seeking to find ways to get resources from funders and elsewhere to expand birth centers like the birth center, to create that medical hub. I mean, and the other thing I would say that's different than 10 years ago is like, shout out to Birth Center Equity for being a place, a convening place. So if all Birth Center Equity did was to put a whole bunch of folks in a room together who are Black, Indigenous people of color, who are either operating birth centers or seeking to operate birth centers, that would be plenty. Because when I was doing what I was doing, and other folks who've had birth centers for 30 years, folks who've had birth centers for 10 years, 15 years, there was nobody to ask, right? There was nobody to say like, hey, I'm about to spend $5,000 on blank. Is this a good idea? I was lucky to have some white midwives who had birth centers who would answer those questions, but it just putting everyone in a room together and allowing us to be resources to each other, I think is important so that folks have the opportunity to learn the soft way, not the hard way. It's hard enough without having to like make mistakes that other people have already made before you because you don't know better. So I think that that's really important as well. And that's very different than 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
So I'm going to take this question. I have 2 more questions, and I think we're going to go to questions in the chat. So the next question I have for Dr. Skeins, can you talk about collaboration with community-based, maybe home birth midwives or midwives that are working more in the community? How can OBs collaborate more to support the growth of community-based midwives?
I think that, so this was another thing that was a little bit tricky here in Alabama. A lot of people, or a lot of OBGYNs are basically afraid to be the backup OB for community midwives. We used to provide shadow care, meaning, you know, they would have a home birth midwife and they would come see us maybe 3 times. And then if they need to transfer to the hospital, then, you know, you already have a provider who knows what the plan was. The reason that that is such a big fear of OBGYNs is that there's this fear of litigation, right? That, you know, I mean, it's very real. You know, this is a high litigation field or specialty, but I don't think it's inherently more risky than just taking care of the patient yourself. I mean, if somebody's going to sue, they're just going to sue that, you know. But I think that is the major drawback, and especially, you know, the pushback that I've gotten from people who, you know, I've done call rotations with is like, well, I don't want to be responsible for, you know, what the midwife has done at home or in the birthing center. But when you really think about it logically, you're really not you're not liable for care that you didn't provide outside of the hospital. You're only liable for what you do for the patient. But that is the major fear, and that's the major concern. So for me, to me, the biggest solution to that would be that I think that we need tort reform, regarding, because, you know, we want people to have good outcomes, but if we're honest about this specialty and about this field, there's only so much we're in control of as a provider, as a midwife, or as an OBGYN. Whether you get a perfect baby or not is not necessarily within our control. And it's not necessarily something that a provider should be, you know, quote unquote, punished for. So I think the way that we think about birth and the way we think about pregnancy, you know, with regards to litigation, I think does have to change in order to get more OBGYNs on board. And I also think having clarity with providers about what you're actually responsible for, you know, like, it doesn't make sense to think that you would be responsible for what actually happened at a home birth when you weren't there, you weren't the provider at the home birth. So I think having that clarity, having those honest conversations, because I always feel like it's safer when there's collaborative care, because I think people will transfer sooner, you know, if they know that on the other end of the transfer is an OBGYN who's going to accept the patient and who's not going to be upset about it, who's just going to take the patient for what has happened and is going to treat the patient well. I think when people transfer late, it's usually because they're afraid of what's going to happen once the patient gets to the hospital, and specifically here in Alabama, because people can be so, I don't know what the right word is, but I would say petty with regards to reporting people in regards to those types of situations. So I think having clear communication about what collaborative care looks like, what it means, and what each person would be responsible for, I think would help people to be more interested in providing this service, because it's actually critical to what we do. I don't think that out of hospital birth is going anywhere. You know, if anything, it's becoming more popular.
Thank you. That was a very nuanced answer with some solutions in there that we can all write down and work on. I wrote down a couple. Thank you. The next question is just about how we were talking about how birth centers can be community centers, wellness hubs for people to access care outside of their pregnancy for their families, you know, things that the community needs. And I'm just wondering, in these times when we're seeing the ramp up of targeting of immigrants, of transgender people, you know, we have families that are being deported or not coming to care for fear of being deported. We have transgender folks that are being targeted and blamed for things, and the loss of access to gender affirming care. So how can birth centers be places of refuge and sanctuary for those who are most vulnerable in our communities? That's to all the panelists, so anyone can answer.
Yeah, I think this is complicated because being a place means you have to be like have safety yourself, right? So I think that we are just going to have to do a lot of careful assessment of our surroundings to make decisions around how we position ourselves in a way that allows us to keep our doors open, but also allows us to be a place that people identify as where they can go when they need care, um, across communities. Um, and every, the South is the South is the South. So I think the tension and friction that we are experiencing is pretty similar. Um, and then it has its individual state or even like city nuances. But I think the importance of a team and the team, and for those birth centers that are nonprofits, that includes your board, like identifying like what your boundaries are, like who you exist in the community for, and what lines you're going to hold, and what consequences you're willing to endure, really. Like, what can you survive as an entity in your community? And it's time to have those conversations. We can't have those conversations further down the line. We don't need to start having those conversations when ICE is at the front door. We need to be having those conversations now so that we know how our staff has to move if that happens, and we know where our leadership stands, um, and we make decisions to curate potentially our messaging, not in a way that violates our values, but in a way that enables us to survive and potentially thrive, to deliver what our communities need. And this is like a very delicate, challenging negotiation. And so we really have to be thinking it through and working it through and troubleshooting it right now. Like, I mean, yesterday, but today,
Mm,
certainly. Um, and not wait to like be up against the wall fully to figure that out.
yeah. You can go ahead.
Do we have to really stay firm with our vision for inclusion? I think right now you see a lot of people really backing down on their inclusion criteria and things like that. And I think that we have to stand firm. I think it is particularly hard and nuanced because many of us are Black women, um, and we may feel a lot of disappointment because we saw these things coming, and may feel disappointment because we are always showing up and not necessarily being shown up for. But I do think that we can hold the line, even if we are not actively, um, protesting or doing things that we might have done in the past. I do think this is something where we can stay strong and hold the line and say we're not giving up our inclusion efforts because it's important for us. We've made it this far with it, and we're not going to turn our backs on what we know to be right.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you have said. It is definitely a thin line to toe. You know, we have our open access clinic and we provide care to those that are undocumented, if they want to come. I think one of our biggest barriers is the language barrier and getting people in to do the interpretation or translation, whatever. But definitely knowing that we are there. As Tamara talked earlier about being in the community, and our birth center is a small house in the community. Pretty 80% of my street is Hispanic and Latino. And they didn't even know what I did until we had our open house, and they came and was like, "Oh, do you mind if I share this information with people in my church?" And I'm like, "Sure, that's what we're here for." So that showing up in the community, being there, like you said, even when it's not about maternal health or reproductive justice, just to let people know that you're here and you're a place that they can come is important. When we first started our birth center, we talked about doing gender affirming care and not having enough providers that were proficient in that has like really curtailed that effort on our part. But the way we have said, let's do something different is we're going to do fertility services, we're going to do IUI. What are ways that we can find what's our niche? Like, how can we still provide support? Because we ain't got to do everything. You just got to do enough to make people feel seen, felt, and heard. Yeah, I think that with some of the recent DEI conversation, we have had some discussions with funders about changing our language. Oh, do you only serve Black people? And I'm like, no, we're here for everybody. If you want to see my stats, I'll show you. But I do center those people that are most marginalized, those people that have the highest disparities. And so it's really about staying true to what you're here for, who you want to serve, and why, and your why. What's your why? And that's going to be different for everybody's birth center. It's going to be different for me. It's going to be different for those in Miami. It's going to be different for those in Texas on the border. So I think that you just have to know what you're here for and who you are here to serve, and stay true to it.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your answers. This is definitely a time for deep solidarity, to know who is in your community and what resources exist for safety, who else is serving marginalized people because they may have resources you don't have, like security or food access or legal services or cybersecurity, like there are resources out here. And I think from a birth justice standpoint, having those cross movement conversations and collaborations, not just pigeonholing ourselves into birth work, is also important. So getting together with folks who are working on abolition or, family safety, carceral system, state system issues, um, and legal services has been a big request in our community too. So finding out who's doing that, and building those networks of support so that we can surround people. But I appreciate the questions about what can you survive? That's a really real question that I'm going to sit down and make a list of tonight. What can we survive? Having a firm vision for inclusion, carefully assessing threats, but maintaining that commitment and that dedication to serving the people that are most marginalized in your community. So I appreciate what all of you are doing and even the ways you're thinking about open access clinics and fertility services and CSAs and how we can expand how we're supporting people. So I'd love to take the last 15 minutes to go to questions in the chat. I saw one about what challenges you face when opening your birth center. And I know y'all might have to think back a little bit if you've been in the game for a minute. I recently had to make a list and with the partnership that Tamara and I are doing together, and we put it into 4 buckets: licensure, accreditation, operations, and billing. Those are the 4 buckets that we anticipate will probably be the most challenging and need the most support. But go ahead, please answer, Dr. Skanes.
Oh, I was going to say, in the beginning, our biggest challenge was the licensure. There was no pathway for licensure here in Alabama. So, of course, we had to sue the state of Alabama because the birthing center was open. We were seeing patients. And, basically, we received a phone call that you're operating a hospital without a license and you could go to jail, even though, we know that birthing centers are not hospitals. And so we were able to get help from the ACLU to bring forth litigation against the Department of Health here. And we were successful in that litigation, but that took a year, like a year away from our operations, and that cost money in the fact that, when we first started, we had grants, but grants have to be used within a certain time frame. And so if you're not using them within a certain time frame, you lose that access to that money. So that was harmful, as well as the fact that, we were building our clientele, then you stop providing those services. So you're starting from ground zero again with rebuilding your clientele. So those were like the biggest challenges that we faced in the beginning.
Well, congratulations on the win. That one, when I saw it, it felt like it was for all of us. That was for the culture. Thank you. Other questions in the chat? Julie, if you could help us uplift any questions.
Think we don't have any new ones. If folks want to drop them in the chat, I am not seeing any more questions.
Or feel free, I think folks, can they unmute themselves? They can, right?
Yeah.
Feel free to come off mute and ask your question as well. If you're not able to type it in the chat, we have about 13 more minutes together.
There was one comment talking about the need for convening OBs with midwives around collaboration. Where can there be a greater space for that? I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that or any emerging work in that area.
Well, the good old home birth summits need to make a comeback. Those of us who've been in this work over a decade remember the home birth summits, where there were guidelines that were developed for transport, and there were, I believe, midwives and OBs and other folks in the field that were involved in those conversations.
I think that the OBs that are in the light, let's say, who are illuminated about the utility of working collaboratively with midwives are generally unicorns, right? There are not very many of them. They generally stand alone, like in their city, state, even. And so I think developing opportunities for those folks to like talk to their colleagues in a broader way. There was an amazing OB who was featured at the last virtual conference for MBMA, who's in Pennsylvania.
Dr. Sheree Livingston.
Yes, there's a handful of y'all who know the story, who are able maybe to tell that story more broadly. And I think creating maybe learning opportunities for OBs that are like, they philosophically agree, but like have practical concerns about putting themselves out there would be an opportunity, I think, to like demystify it a little bit and get more buy-in potentially.
We have a hand raised from Cortez. Would you want to, can you unmute?
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank everyone on the panel. And I think another one of the major solutions is getting some type of headway into these educational institutions. So our medical schools, for lack, and I know that's a lot of laying the ground of work, but that also I think is a long-term goal that we can most definitely be successful at. Because if it starts in the education, then there's not as much fear and demystifying needed once they matriculate. So that will be one of them. And then, yeah, let's go, y'all. We're going to still be doing the work that we're doing because it's so necessary. And just, I don't know which midwife said it, but just staying focused, staying on our vision and our mission and our guiding principles, we're going to still be here long after all of the mess that's going on. We're going to still be here. So once again, thank you all so very much. And if you haven't given yourself a hug today, please hug yourself.
Thank you. Hugging myself now. And I agree with you about transforming medical education.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yes, I was going to say the same, Cortez, because my first introduction to midwifery was in medical school. They actually had a birthing center at the hospital that I was at. That was run totally by midwives. It was a totally separate service than the OB service. And so that was really amazing to go and see that. And then to have midwives in my residency program. And I think the earlier the exposure, before people get jaded, because once you get to be an attending, you get jaded very easily because it's a lot of politics and things that come along with that. But when you see it in medical school, those students are very, very open to it. Even in undergrad, very, very open to it. So, if you have a birthing center and you have, a college or a medical school nearby, that's a great opportunity to be like, hey, can I come in and give a lecture on midwifery, on birth, birth justice, or the history of obstetrics and things like that aren't routinely covered as a part of our medical education that those students would love to hear about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a project that we have here in Miami, going and teaching residents, medical students, doing the associations and the student groups, doing tours of the birth center. That's something that Samara and I have collaborated on, is bringing the medical students to tour the birth center, and they're genuinely like, wow, I never knew this existed. I never would have known this existed. But that should be a required part of, obstetric training, is go visit a birth center, and see, how physiologic birth works, because it works. We know that.
I have
I'd like
another question. Oh, we
No,
have a
I
question in
just
the
want
chat.
to jump in on that conversation as we're talking about bringing in residents and medical students. We have midwifery students who've never visited a birth center. If you're going through a midwifery program and you have never been to a birth center, you don't know what happens in a birth center, you're afraid because an out-of-hospital birth. So I think we got a lot of work to do, not just from the medical perspective, but even within our own profession.
Yeah.
Nurse midwives, you mean?
Nursing.
Nurse, yes, nurse midwives.
Nurse midwives, yes.
Yes,
Oh.
nurse midwives.
Yeah, which
So
is the
maybe-
majority of midwives. So we do have to address that by
Mhm.
going through the schools and looking at what those
Mhm.
requirements are. Yeah, that's a very good point, Tina. I hadn't even considered that.
But that brings me to another barrier. So a lot of the nurse midwifery schools have insurance requirements that are inaccessible for a lot of birth centers, home birth practices. When you're required to have these millions of dollars of insurance to even have a student in your facility, that's another barrier.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Thank
the
you.
question that came in on the chat was from Leslie Welch of Birth Center Equity. Birth
Shout
Center
out to Les. Hey, Leslie.
Here. Birth Center Equity launched Beloved Birth 50 by 50 this week. Can you share your thoughts about this goal and how we work together to achieve it? And it's the goal of achieving by the year 2050, 50% of all births in the US, all babies born in the US will arrive in the care of midwives.
Great question. What do you all think about the goal? Is it a worthy goal? Is it achievable? How do we get there? 50 by 50.
I think it's a worthy goal. The practical aspect of achieving that requires a level of scaling, both for CNMs and direct entry midwives, that there is not the infrastructure in place to support. So like we need infrastructure strengthening in order to deliver on that. Before we even get into getting the AMA and ACOG like out of the way, to recognize that workforce shortages in obstetrics via retirement and other constraints mean that increasing the number of midwives is a way to address those workforce shortages. We need to have this capacity to train and deliver that number of midwives to families, and we don't have the capacity right now. So what would need to happen is some infrastructure strengthening, like more programs for CNMs, more programs for direct entry midwives, a better access of the even the portfolio evaluation process for CPMs. There just is an infrastructure challenge, and we're going to need to work that infrastructure challenge first in order to get those numbers. In addition to getting the medical side of the aisle to step back and allow us to come into the space that belongs to us in every other country on the planet.
Yeah. Has anybody run those numbers? Leslie, Julie, like how many midwives is that? And if not, we need to know.
We do need to know. We haven't run those numbers. We will be working on a blueprint in the coming months, and you all will know about it because it will involve stakeholders like yourselves, and also I'm really looking for some stat and finance chops for those kinds of projections and numbers. Thank you
Okay.
guys for everything you do and for being here today.
Thank you for this space. Good things to come. So as we wrap up, I'm going to invite our panelists to give us their closing thoughts as we reflect on this very rich conversation. We got into community needs, expanding the role of birth centers, how we started, what we've learned along the way, what's our vision for the future. So just share any closing thoughts of encouragement or anything you wish you knew when you started, or what you're taking with you into this next season. The floor is open, and it's an open question. I'm gonna call on somebody.
So
I
I
think,
think,
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead, Tina.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, the solutions are pretty clear, We need to fund more Black-led birth centers. We need to find a way to license and support midwives, CPMs and CNMs. We need to enforce, probably invest in the workforce. And that's that infrastructure that Tamara was talking about, not just more programs, but we have programs and they can't find preceptor sites. They can't find places to send their students. So it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, And we just need to protect reproductive freedom at all costs right now.
Thank you.
So my thoughts were similar along those lines. We already know what the solutions are. I think my vision for Alabama and for the US as a whole would be total integration of the system of home birth midwives, nurse midwives, physicians, OBGYNs, maternal fetal medicine, to get to a place where we're all so connected that you're just advancing level of care, not like starting over. It's just you start here and you advance as necessary based on your risk, based on occurrences within the pregnancy, and that we get to a place where we all feel comfortable communicating with each other professionally, and that people really have an option, that when people come, to see, me, it's not just, oh, I'm going to have a baby in the hospital, but it's like, oh, I'm still thinking about whether the hospital is best or whether the birth center is best or maybe at home is best, where people feel like they have that option. And we're really discussing those things and making shared decisions with our patients.
Excellent. I saw somebody put in the chat, we need about 100,000 midwives. It went by fast, but I saw that comment. I think, if I think of Indonesia, which I think is a country of similar size to ours, has, I think, something like 300,000 midwives. So that's just something to chew on. But Tamara, did you have closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think we do have the solutions. So I think the questions we need to be asking is like, how do we get the resources to implement them, right? I think we need to move the conversation from like, it seems like we've kind of moved the conversation away from like, is out of hospital birth safe? I think that conversation, we can close that conversation into a conversation around like, how do we empower communities to implement the solutions that we already know? We know what we need. We know what we have to offer. So how do we resource ourselves to be able to deliver those solutions to our communities in a way that aligns with whatever it is that they need? And whether that's more midwives, whether that's more, food justice programs, whether that's like whatever that is, how do we resource the folks who are on the ground doing the work to actually deliver the solutions they've already discerned to their communities? And an integrated system like Dr. Heather just described, like what exists in the Netherlands, for example, where the whole system is in communication with each other and working in synergy, and 30% of babies are born at home and everybody's okay with that. I think that, like, what does that deliver for families? It delivers better outcomes, and that's what we deserve. And so how do we get to the version of healthcare for this part of the life cycle that is actually what we deserve? And can everybody be invested in that? I know folks say this and like, have the kind of day you deserve. The kind of day that I deserve is a day in which I don't, look at my organization's bank account as the first, second, or third thing I do when I wake up, right? Because we are well resourced to do the labor that our community is asking for us to do.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'll just close us out by saying, as birth justice advocates, and birth workers and birth warriors. We are organizing for a future where reproductive autonomy and freedom are not contingent upon one's location or identity. No one should have to cross state lines or country borders to receive the care they need. In our future world, midwifery care and holistic birthing services are integrated into every community, making them accessible to all who seek them. So thank you for being here for Lessons from the South, and happy Birth Center Week as we close out strong. Y'all take care. Bye, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Oh, I heard we're supposed to dance. Anybody want to stay out and dance? You're welcome to. Hi, Mama Sheila. I see you with your camera on. Girl from the South. Southern Hip.
I've been up, I've been down. Feel like I moved mountains. Got friends that
For the
cried
rest of your
mountains.
day.
Oh, I'm wanting everybody. Soon as I get in this party, I'm gonna let go of this body. I'm gonna love on me. Nobody can judge me but me. I was born free.
Hey, y'all, drop it. I'm gonna drop it.
Drop it like a thotty. I say now pop it like a thotty.
Drop
Pop
it.
it like a thotty. We say now drop it like a thotty. Drop it like a thotty. Church girls
That
acting
might
like
be my
fat
song.
girl